The little black girl hid behind the fuel tanks as someone whispered her name across the windy deck. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The wind swept across the cargo deck of the old ferry like a cold hand brushing the metal rails. The waves crashed against the hull in slow, heavy thuds, and the whole ship groaned as if it were trying to warn someone. Tucked behind two tall fuel tanks, a little black girl no older than 8 pressed her back against the metal surface. Her breath came in fast, frightened bursts. Her small fingers dug into the chipped paint as she tried to make herself invisible. She had run until her legs burned, her thin shoes slapping the deck as she searched for a place to hide. She had not expected the ferry to feel so enormous, with steel passageways that echoed every step and long shadows cast by the industrial lights above. She kept wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, trying not to cry, trying to stay quiet, because somewhere out there on the other side of the fuel tanks, she had heard someone whisper her name. The whisper had slid across the deck like smoke carried by the wind. It was low, stretched, too calm to belong to anyone she trusted. She had looked around quickly, but no one had been close enough to speak to her. The deck had been empty except for a few rows of tied-down equipment and distant maintenance lights flickering at the far end. That was when fear gripped her chest. She had darted behind the tanks, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The wind blew again, colder this time, slipping through the gaps in the containers. Somewhere behind her came the faint metallic clang of a loose chain shifting. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the noise would stop. She wanted someone good to find her, someone safe, but she had no way of knowing who that would be. Her mother had told her to stay inside the passenger cabin, told her not to wander, told her that the trip across the water would be short. But the moment her mother stepped away to speak with a crew member, everything changed. A man she did not recognize had appeared near the hallway. He had not touched her, he had not spoken to her, but the way he watched her made her legs start moving before she even understood what was happening. Now she was alone on the windy deck, hidden in a place she hoped no one would think to look. She pulled her knees up to her chest and listened as another whisper crawled over the wind, calling her name again, slower this time, as if whoever was out there already knew exactly where she was hiding. The wind howled once again, but this time it was different. It carried with it the faintest scent of gasoline and salt water, mingling with the metallic tang of the ship's structure. Behind the towering fuel tanks, the little black girl squeezed her eyes shut, praying the whisper would stop, praying the footsteps wouldn't reach her. Her small, trembling body was pressed against the cold metal, as if she could blend into it, disappear into the shadows of the deck. She knew she wasn't safe. She could feel it in her bones. Something was wrong. Her heart raced as another whisper, faint but unmistakable, fluttered across the air. Maya, her name, soft and insistent. She froze, her breath caught in her throat, the blood running cold in her veins. It was too close now. The voice wasn't coming from behind the tanks. It was coming from the other side, from the open deck. Someone was moving toward her. She didn't know who, but she knew she couldn't stay hidden for long. She couldn't stay where she was. She had to run. But where? Her small, bare feet were bleeding, the rough wood of the deck cutting into her skin as she made her way slowly, quietly, keeping close to the shadows. She kept her head down, her eyes scanning for any sign of movement. She heard the thudding of footsteps getting louder, the voice still calling her name, now growing more insistent, almost desperate. Maya, I know you're out here. You can't hide forever. The girl's breath caught in her chest. The voice sounded familiar, too familiar. It was him, the man she'd been trying to avoid for days, the one her mother had warned her about. He wasn't just any man. He was the one who had promised to protect her, but now he was the one she feared. The man who claimed to be her stepfather. She couldn't remember a time before him. He had always been there, lurking in the background, a shadow in her life. And now, he was looking for her. She felt her legs tremble with fear, but she knew she couldn't let herself be caught. Not now. Not when she had a chance to escape. The ferry was huge, but it was no match for the man who had been stalking her. She could hear his voice getting closer, feel his presence like a shadow creeping toward her. Panic surged in her chest, and she instinctively turned toward the side of the deck, the one that led toward the crew's quarters. Maybe she could find another hiding spot there. Maybe she could make it. She pressed on, ignoring the sharp pain in her feet, her mind focused on one thing, getting away. As she rounded the corner, she collided with something hard. A figure, tall, broad-shouldered. She froze, heart hammering in her chest. The man in front of her was a biker. His leather jacket gleamed in the dim light, the symbol of his club standing out starkly against the darkness. He didn't look threatening. In fact, he looked more concerned than anything, his sharp eyes scanning the deck as if searching for something or someone. "You all right, kid?" he asked, his voice deep and calm. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She nodded, too scared to speak, too scared to explain why she was on the deck in the middle of the night. "It's not safe out here." "Where are you going?" he asked, his gaze softening when he saw the fear in her eyes. I need to find my mom," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. She didn't know why she trusted him, but something in his eyes made her feel like she could. He didn't judge her. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at her, as if he could see the fear inside her. "Your mom's not here, is she?" the biker said gently, stepping closer. Maya bit her lip, nodding, unable to find the words. The man sighed and shook his head. "Look, I'm going to help you," he said, his voice steady. "We'll figure it out." Before she could say anything, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a phone. He dialed something quickly, his fingers moving with a familiarity that made Maya realize he was used to being in charge. "Hey, it's me. I've got a kid here. Maya Jenkins." He paused, listening intently. "Yeah, we need to keep her safe. They're after her. She's hiding. We need backup." Maya's breath caught in her throat as he spoke into the phone. "We're on the ferry at Dock 7. Get here fast." He hung up the phone and looked back at her. "They're on their way. We've got to move. Stay close to me." Maya could hardly believe what was happening. Was this real? Was someone finally going to help her? She didn't know this man, but she knew one thing. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't trying to hurt her. He was trying to protect her. They started walking, quietly at first, as if trying not to attract attention. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening, something that would change her life forever. As they moved toward the back of the ferry, she glanced over her shoulder, wondering if her stepfather was still out there, still searching. She didn't know how much longer she could keep running. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. The tension was thick in the air as Maya walked close behind the biker, her small feet barely making a sound on the metal deck of the ferry. Every step felt heavy, like 1,000 eyes were watching them, waiting for them to slip up. The wind whipped through the open spaces of the ship, carrying the salty smell of the ocean and the faint sound of the engines rumbling far below. Maya kept her head down, her heart racing with every passing second. She didn't know where they were going, but she trusted the biker. She had to. The night had turned darker, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, as if the ship itself was swallowing them whole. She could still feel the haunting presence of her stepfather, his dark figure looming in the back of her mind. She couldn't shake the thought that he might be right behind them, watching their every move. The biker didn't seem concerned, though. He walked with purpose, his eyes scanning the deck, always looking ahead, never looking back. He had already told her that help was on the way, that backup was coming. Maya didn't fully understand what that meant, but the words were enough to give her a faint sense of security, a brief flicker of hope. "Stay close to me," the biker murmured without looking at her. His voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that made her feel like everything would be okay. But Maya wasn't so sure. She couldn't remember the last time things were okay. She had never known what safety felt like. As they rounded a corner of the ship, the sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. The biker's hand shot out to gently grab her arm, pulling her into the shadows of a nearby doorway. Maya's breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide as she tried to calm her nerves. "Don't move," the biker whispered. Maya nodded, trying her best to stay as still as possible. She could hear the footsteps growing louder, the sound of shoes scraping against the metal deck. She held her breath, praying they wouldn't be found. From behind the corner, 2 figures appeared. The biker stiffened, his muscles tensing like a coiled spring. Maya couldn't see their faces, but she knew they were looking for her. Her stepfather's presence still lingered in the air. She could almost hear his voice in the back of her mind, shouting her name, calling her out. But the biker didn't move. He stood still, watching the two men pass by, their heavy boots thumping against the metal floor. When the figures were out of sight, the biker exhaled slowly, his grip on Maya's arm relaxing. "That was too close," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "We have to move faster. They'll be looking for you." Maya swallowed hard, her throat dry as she nodded. She didn't want to stay hidden forever. She wanted to be safe. She wanted to go home, wherever that was. The biker led her further into the maze of the ship, down narrow hallways and across open decks where the wind howled with. Every step, they passed through a door and into a dimly lit hallway, the air thick with the smell of engine grease and metal. The biker's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out quickly, glancing at the screen. "They're on their way," he said, a small sigh of relief escaping his lips. "But we need to keep moving. They'll be here soon." Maya didn't know who they were, but she trusted the biker's words. She wanted to believe that help was coming. She wanted to believe that, for once, someone was going to make sure she was safe. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. The biker paused for a moment before turning to face her. His eyes softened, but there was a hint of something darker in his expression. "We're getting you off this ship," he said firmly. "We'll make sure you're safe." Maya's heart fluttered in her chest. She didn't know what safe meant anymore, but hearing the word from someone who wasn't her stepfather felt like the first real hope she had felt in a long time. She looked up at the biker, trying to read his face, trying to understand what kind of person he was. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't dangerous. He was her protector. "What about my mom?" Maya asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. The biker's expression darkened, and for a moment, Maya wondered if she had asked the wrong question. "Your mom will be all right," he said, his voice steady. "But we need to get you to safety first. We'll figure out the rest." Maya nodded slowly, unsure of what that meant, but trusting him nonetheless. They continued down the hallway, and as they reached another door, Maya could hear the sound of voices growing louder. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The biker held up a hand, signaling for her to stay quiet. Slowly, he opened the door, and Maya followed him into another darkened room. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to control her breathing. The footsteps were closer now. She could hear them moving down the hallway. The biker stood next to her, his eyes sharp, his hand resting on the handle of his bike. Maya's chest tightened as the voices grew louder, closer. She had to stay calm. She had to stay hidden. She had to trust him. The door creaked open slowly, the faintest light from the corridor spilling into the small, dimly lit room. Maya's heart pounded as she pressed herself tighter against the wall, barely able to breathe. The biker, whose name she still didn't know, stood at the door with his back to her, listening intently. His hand hovered over the handle of his bike, ready to spring into action at any moment. The footsteps outside the door grew louder, and Maya's entire body tensed. She dared not make a sound. The voices of the men she had been running from echoed down the hallway. They were close. Too close. The biker didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his back straight and his eyes focused, as though he could sense every movement in the air. The voices grew louder, closer still. They were coming down the hall toward them, and Maya felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. Would they find them? Would they get caught? What would happen to her? The biker suddenly raised his hand, signaling for her to remain silent. He took one last look down the hallway before pushing the door open just a fraction more. His body was now a shield between her and whatever might be waiting on the other side. Maya held her breath, the anticipation clawing at her insides. Then the voices stopped. For a moment, everything was eerily quiet. Maya could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, thudding louder than it should. The door opened slightly wider, and she could hear the unmistakable sound of boots approaching. The biker's hand clenched around the door handle, his knuckles turning white. "Stay close to me," he whispered, his voice steady and calm. Maya nodded, too scared to speak. She could feel his presence, his strength, like a protective barrier between her and the danger outside. As the footsteps grew closer, the biker took a deep breath. Without a word, he moved. They slipped into the shadows of the room, disappearing into the darkness. The men passed the doorway, their voices muffled but still distinct. Maya held her breath, praying they wouldn't stop and turn into the room. She clutched the back of the biker's jacket tightly, trying to calm her racing heart. "It's okay," the biker whispered, his voice low and soothing. "Just stay quiet." The minutes felt like hours, but eventually, the footsteps faded into the distance. The biker slowly eased away from the door and turned to Maya, his expression grim. "We need to move. Now." Maya nodded quickly, still too afraid to speak. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this up. The fear, the uncertainty, the constant running. She just wanted it to end. She wanted to feel safe, even if just for a moment. The biker led her down another narrow corridor, this one darker than the last. The cold metal walls of the ferry pressed in around them, and Maya could hear the hum of the ship's engines deep below. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet. Every footstep, every breath. They rounded another corner, and the biker paused. Maya's eyes flicked to the end of the hallway, where a faint light shone through a door left ajar. "That's the exit," the biker said, his voice low but firm. Maya's pulse quickened at the thought of finally leaving, of getting off this ship and away from her stepfather, away from the people who had been hunting her. But then the biker's expression shifted. "It's not going to be easy," he muttered. Maya's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "We're not alone in this," the biker said, his gaze scanning the hallway as if he expected something, or someone, else to appear at any moment. Maya's stomach tightened. What was happening? Who else was after her? "Just stay close," the biker added, his voice soft but urgent. "And don't make a sound." He reached for the door handle, but before he could open it, the sound of approaching footsteps filled the air once again. Maya's eyes widened in panic. She turned to the biker, but his expression was calm. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice steady. He opened the door, leading her into a cramped stairwell. They moved quickly, quietly, Maya's small footsteps almost lost in the noise of the ship's machinery. The biker led her to a door at the bottom of the stairs. He paused, listening carefully. The footsteps were louder now, closer than ever. He reached for the door, but just as his fingers brushed the handle, the sound of voices cut through the air. Maya's breath caught in her throat. There was no time. The biker pushed the door open with one swift motion. He ushered Maya inside, his hand on her back as he guided her into a small, windowless room. "Lock it," he ordered. Maya turned to find a heavy bolt on the door, and she quickly slid it into place. The biker glanced around the room, scanning every corner. His eyes settled on a small vent in the ceiling, a faint draft coming from it. "We wait here," he said. Maya nodded, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. But she had no choice. She had to trust this man. She had to trust that he would keep his promise to protect her. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the ferry's engines below them. Maya sat on the floor, her back against the cold wall, trying to steady her breathing. Her heart was still racing, her nerves on edge after everything that had happened. The biker, whose name she still didn't know, stood by the door, his body tense as he listened for any sound coming from the hallway. His eyes were focused, scanning every inch of the room like a soldier in a battlefield, and Maya couldn't help but wonder how he had become so accustomed to danger. The fear was palpable in the air, but something in the way he carried himself made her feel like, maybe for the first time in days, she wasn't alone. The footsteps outside had stopped, but Maya could still hear the distant voices, the occasional shout, and the sound of hurried movements. She could feel it, the tension in the air, the sense that time was slipping away. They couldn't stay here forever. "What now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The biker didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved closer to the small window in the room, peeking out to see if anyone was still near. He looked over his shoulder at Maya and shook his head. "We wait," he said, his voice low but firm. "They'll be looking for you. We can't make any noise until we're sure they've passed." Maya nodded, her mind racing. It was hard to think straight with the constant feeling that someone was watching, someone was waiting. She wanted to know more. Who was after her? Who was this biker? And why was he helping her? But the questions burned in her throat, and she couldn't bring herself to ask them just yet. "Are they coming?" she asked after a long silence. The biker was still at the window, his eyes trained on the shadowy figures moving across the deck. He didn't look at her as he spoke, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of experience. "They won't get us. We just need to be patient. Maya wasn't sure she could wait any longer. The fear was clawing at her insides, gnawing away at her resolve. But the biker seemed unshaken, his calm demeanor oddly comforting in the midst of the chaos. She drew her knees to her chest and hugged them tightly, staring at the floor. Her thoughts wandered to her mother. Was she okay? Was she even alive? Maya hadn't been able to reach her since the chaos started. And now, all she could do was hope. The moments stretched into what felt like hours, and Maya began to lose track of time. Every small sound made her jump. Every creak of the ship, every whisper of wind against the hull. She had never been so afraid in her life. But the biker remained steady, moving only when necessary, his eyes always alert. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the door behind them creaked open just enough to allow a sliver of light into the room. The biker stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for the small blade at his side. He gestured for Maya to stay still and remained silent. A figure stepped into the doorway. Maya's breath caught in her throat, but the biker relaxed when he saw who it was. It was another biker, tall, with a grizzled beard and a serious expression. He didn't look at Maya, only at the biker who had been protecting her. "It's clear," the new biker said in a low voice. "The others are waiting. It's time to move." The biker who had been guarding Maya nodded once, then turned to her. "We have to go? Stay close, and don't make a sound. We're almost out of here." Maya didn't hesitate. She stood up quickly, her legs unsteady, still weak from the fear and exhaustion. She followed the bikers out into the dimly lit hallway, her heart pounding as they moved swiftly but silently down the corridor. Every door they passed seemed to be hiding more danger, but the biker ahead of her seemed to know exactly where they were going. They came to a set of stairs leading down into the bowels of the ferry. The biker motioned for her to follow him down, and she did without question, the heavy weight of her footsteps echoing in the silence of the ship's underbelly. "We're almost there," the biker said quietly, his voice reassuring. Maya could see the faint light of the exit ahead of them. She was almost free, almost out of the hell she had been running from. But as they reached the bottom of the stairs, something made the biker stop. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what was happening, but she could sense the change in the air. The biker looked over his shoulder at her, his expression grim. "Something's wrong," he muttered. "Stay behind me." He stepped forward, his body a shield between Maya and whatever threat might be approaching. Maya stayed close, her breath shallow, her body trembling. The hallway ahead of them was empty, but the sounds of footsteps, heavy, purposeful, echoed from the distance. The biker's hand moved to his knife again. "Stay low," he whispered. The tension in the air was suffocating as they crept closer to the exit. The footsteps grew louder, closer now, and Maya's heart was in her throat. They were almost there, almost free. But as they reached the exit door, the sounds of movement behind them exploded into a roar of chaos. The door swung open with a loud creak, and the biker immediately stepped forward, his hand gripping the handle of his knife tightly. Maya, frozen for a moment, followed his lead, staying as close as possible, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of footsteps behind them, echoing off the metal walls of the ferry, grew louder, but they couldn't stop now. They were so close. Maya could see the faint light of the exit just ahead, and she felt the sudden, overwhelming surge of hope. But that hope quickly shattered as a shadow appeared in the doorway, blocking their path. The biker's body tensed, and he immediately raised his knife, his stance protective. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what was going to happen, but she could feel the tension in the air. The figure in the doorway stepped forward. It was one of the men who had been chasing her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his face was a hard mask of determination. He wore a black jacket with a logo she didn't recognize, but she knew one thing. He was dangerous. The biker in front of Maya didn't hesitate. He immediately moved, blocking Maya with his body, his voice calm but firm. "You need to turn around and leave," he said, his voice carrying a note of authority. The man in the doorway didn't move. Instead, he smirked, taking a step closer. "You really think you can stop me?" he sneered, his voice cold. "This little girl is mine. And you're in the way." The biker's grip on his knife tightened, but his expression remained steady. "Not happening," he said, his tone low and unwavering. Maya could feel the tension between them, the weight of the confrontation hanging in the air. She wanted to run, to escape, but she couldn't move. She didn't know who to trust. She just wanted to get away from this nightmare. The man in the doorway laughed, a deep, mocking sound. "You think you can protect her?" he said, taking another step forward. "You're just another fool." The biker didn't answer. He just shifted his weight, positioning himself between the man and Maya, making sure she stayed behind him. "Move aside," the man ordered, his voice rising. "I don't have time for this." But the biker remained calm, unshaken. "You're not taking her," he said firmly. The man's eyes narrowed, and he reached for something in his jacket. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she saw the glint of metal. He had a gun. The biker didn't flinch. He knew what he was up against, and he wasn't about to back down. Without warning, the man lunged forward, his hand reaching for the biker's arm. The biker reacted in an instant, twisting his body to the side, grabbing the man's wrist, and using his momentum to throw him off balance. The man stumbled, but quickly regained his footing. The tension between them was palpable, the threat of violence hanging heavy in the air. "I'm not here to fight you," the biker said, his voice steady. "I just want to get her to safety. If you get out of the way, no one has to get hurt." The man laughed again, but this time it was laced with anger. "You really think she's going to be safe with you?" he spat. "She's a liability. And you." He didn't finish his sentence. Instead, he pulled the gun from his jacket, aiming it directly at the biker. Maya froze, her stomach dropping. The cold steel of the gun gleamed in the dim light, and she could feel the weight of it, the danger in the air. The biker didn't move, his body still positioned between Maya and the man. "Put the gun down," he said, his voice low but firm. The man's eyes flickered with hesitation. For a moment, there was silence, the two men locked in a standoff. Maya could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, the fear making it hard to breathe. Then, just as the man took a step forward, the sound of engines roared from the distance, a chorus of motorcycles revving to life. The man's eyes widened in shock. He turned toward the sound, but it was too late. A wave of bikers appeared at the end of the corridor, their motorcycles lined up in perfect formation, their engines growling like a pack of wolves. There were at least 20 of them, all wearing the same leather vests, the same intimidating presence. The man took a step back, his face paling as he realized he was surrounded. "This is your last chance," the biker said, his voice colder now, more commanding. "Get out of our way." The man hesitated, his hand still gripping the gun, but it was clear he was outmatched. The bikers moved forward, their presence undeniable. The man looked around, his mind racing, but in the end, he dropped the gun. "This isn't over," he snarled, before turning and fleeing down the hallway. The bikers made no move to follow. As the man disappeared into the shadows, the biker turned to Maya, his eyes softening. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low. Maya didn't know what to say. She felt a rush of relief, but it was mixed with confusion and exhaustion. She looked at the group of bikers who had come to her aid, their faces all stern but understanding. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. The tension in the air slowly began to subside as the man who had been threatening them disappeared into the shadows. Maya, still trembling, looked around at the bikers who had surrounded her. They had come from all directions, a wall of leather and steel, their motorcycles roaring like a force of nature. She had never felt so small in her life, but in that moment, she also felt an overwhelming sense of relief. They had come for her. She wasn't alone anymore. The biker who had been protecting her, the one who had guided her through the dark hallways of the ferry, looked at her now with a soft expression. His presence was a calming contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. "You're safe," he said again, his voice steady but filled with reassurance. Maya didn't know what to say. She was still processing everything, the fear, the escape, the sudden appearance of the bikers. It was all too much. She had been running for so long, alone, with no one to help her. And now, here she was, standing in a room filled with people who seemed to know exactly what to do. But the question that kept swirling in her mind was the same one that had haunted her for days. Where was her mother? "Where are we going?" Maya finally asked, her voice small but filled with a mixture of curiosity and hope. The biker who had been her protector glanced at her, his face hardening for a moment before he answered. "We're getting you out of here," he said, his voice low but firm. "We'll get you to safety, somewhere you can rest." The other bikers nodded in agreement, their faces set in determined expressions. They were ready to do whatever it took to protect her. The thought of safety, of a place where she wouldn't have to look over her shoulder constantly, made her chest tighten with emotion. But she couldn't shake the worry that still clung to her. What about her mother? My mom. I need to find her, Maya said, her voice trembling. The biker's expression softened, and he took a step closer to her. We'll find her, he promised. But right now, you need to stay safe. Maya nodded, though doubt lingered in her chest. She didn't want to leave without knowing if her mom was okay. But she also knew that she couldn't do this on her own anymore. The bikers were right. She needed to be somewhere safe, somewhere she could think, somewhere the constant fear wouldn't consume her. The group moved quickly, exiting the small room and making their way down the narrow hallway. The sound of the ferry's engines was louder now, vibrating through the walls. Maya kept close to the biker, his protective presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. As they reached the main deck, the wind hit her face, cold and sharp. It felt like freedom, like a promise of something better. But the relief was short-lived. As they stepped onto the deck, a voice echoed through the night, calling out in a harsh, grating tone. Stop right there. Maya froze. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the voice. It was her stepfather, the man who had been hunting her. He was close, too close. The biker immediately moved in front of her, his body shielding hers from the approaching figure. You don't want to do this, the biker said calmly, his voice low but commanding. Stay out of this, the man snapped, his voice full of venom. Maya could see him now, standing at the edge of the deck, his face twisted in anger. He wasn't alone. There were two more men with him, both wearing the same dark, menacing expressions. They had followed her here. The biker didn't flinch. You're not taking her, he said firmly, his stance unyielding. The man sneered, stepping forward. You think you can stop me? She's mine. The biker stood his ground. She's not going anywhere with you. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the anger in the air, the desperation. She wanted to run, but she knew she had nowhere to go. She had no choice but to trust the bikers, to trust the man who had been her protector. You don't have to do this, the biker said, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of warning. Let her go. The man glared at him, his fists clenched. You have no idea what you're getting into, he growled. But the biker didn't back down. You're not the one in control anymore, he said, his voice colder now. Step aside. The tension in the air was unbearable, thick with the threat of violence. Maya could hear her breath coming in shallow gasps, her entire body rigid with fear. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew one thing. The bikers were not going to let her go back. Not without a fight. Just as the man took a step forward, ready to make his move, the sound of engines roared in the distance. A flash of headlights cut through the darkness. The bikers' reinforcements had arrived. A group of motorcycles sped toward them, their engines growling like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. The man's expression faltered, his eyes shifting from the bikers to the incoming group. For a moment, he hesitated. It was enough. The biker in front of Maya took a step forward, his stance widening as he prepared to face off with the man. This is your last chance, the biker said, his voice low and menacing. Get out of here. The man looked at the bikers, his face contorting with rage, but he didn't move. Then, with a final, furious glare, he turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows. Maya stood frozen, her body shaking. It was over. For now, she was safe, at least for tonight. As the man disappeared into the darkness, Maya stood frozen, her heart still pounding in her chest. She could feel the tension in the air, but as the roar of the motorcycles grew louder, she realized that the immediate danger had passed. The bikers around her were already moving, some of them turning toward the group that had just arrived. The sound of engines reverberated through the air, and the soft glow of their headlights lit up the deck like a signal. Maya felt a surge of relief, but it was quickly replaced by exhaustion. She had been running for so long. The fear had drained her, and now, standing there in the cool night air, she felt like she could collapse. The biker who had been by her side, the one who had protected her through it all, was still watching her carefully. His expression softened for just a moment before he turned to the others who had arrived. Is she okay? One of the bikers asked, his voice deep and filled with concern. Maya barely had the energy to answer. The biker who had protected her nodded, his gaze still on her. She's shaken, but she'll be fine, he said, his voice calm, reassuring. Maya looked up at him, her throat tight. Thank you, she whispered, barely able to get the words out. She didn't know how to express the gratitude that was overwhelming her, but she knew one thing. Without these bikers, she wouldn't have made it this far. Without them, she might have been caught, dragged back into the nightmare she had been trying to escape. The bikers around her began to disperse, talking quietly among themselves, planning their next move. One of them, a woman with a sharp look in her eyes, stepped forward. We're not out of danger yet, she said, her voice low but firm. We need to keep moving. They'll be looking for her. The biker who had been protecting Maya nodded. We'll get her somewhere safe, he said, his voice steady. Maya felt a new wave of fear wash over her. She hadn't thought about what came next. She had been so focused on escaping, on getting away from her stepfather, that she hadn't considered where she would go once she was free. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. She felt the weight of that truth settle heavily on her shoulders. The woman who had spoken before turned to Maya, her expression softening. You're going to be okay, she said, her voice gentle. We're going to make sure of that. Maya nodded, though her mind was still spinning. She couldn't shake the thought of her mother. Was she safe? Was she even alive? She wanted to ask, but she didn't know how. She didn't know if it was safe to ask. We have a place, the woman continued. It's off the grid, away from the city. You'll be safe there. Maya felt a small flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. She could feel the fear still gripping her chest, but there was a thread of hope weaving through it now. The bikers had a plan, and maybe, just maybe, they could keep her safe. Let's go, the woman said, her tone changing to one of urgency. The longer we stay here, the more danger we're in. Maya followed her lead, still feeling weak, still unsure of everything, but knowing she had no other choice but to trust them. As they moved toward the bikes, the wind picked up again, biting at her skin, but this time, she barely noticed it. She was too focused on getting away. She climbed onto one of the bikes, her legs still shaky, but the biker who had protected her helped her settle, his hands steady as he adjusted the helmet on her head. Hold on tight, he said softly. Maya nodded, gripping the sides of the bike as they started the engines. The roar of the motorcycles filled the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Maya felt like she was moving forward, leaving behind the nightmare that had haunted her for so long. The group sped off into the night, the wind whipping past them as the ferry faded into the distance. As they rode, the lights of the city flickered behind them, growing smaller and smaller until they were nothing but a memory. Maya looked ahead, the path ahead uncertain, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. These people, these bikers, had given her a chance to escape, a chance to start over. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she held on to the one truth she could trust. She was going to be okay. The road ahead stretched out before her, dark and uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel afraid. She felt free. The motorcycles sped through the night, their engines roaring in unison, cutting through the silence like a storm. Maya held on tightly to the biker in front of her, feeling the vibrations of the bike through her entire body. The wind whipped her hair behind her, and for a moment, she could almost forget everything that had happened. The fear, the running, the uncertainty. The darkness around them felt endless, but there was something strangely comforting about the rhythm of the ride. The city lights were now far behind them, replaced by open fields and winding roads. Maya didn't know where they were going, but she trusted the bikers. She trusted the one who had stayed with her all this time, the one who had kept her safe when she had nowhere else to turn. The journey felt long, and the night air was growing colder, but the biker's grip never wavered. He was steady, calm, like a rock in the storm. Maya's thoughts drifted to her mother. She hadn't heard from her since she had been forced to run. Was she okay? Was she out there somewhere, waiting for her? She didn't know. She couldn't know. The thought of being separated from her mother for so long weighed heavily on her heart, but she had no choice but to keep moving forward. Are we almost there? Maya finally asked, her voice small against the roar of the engines. The biker didn't answer right away. Instead, he just glanced over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the road ahead before he gave a small nod. "We're almost there," he said, his voice steady, though Maya could hear the edge of concern in it. She didn't know what to expect when they arrived at their destination, but the quiet urgency in his voice told her that they were about to face something else, something new. Maya looked around as they rode, the landscape changing slowly as they moved farther from the city. The roads were narrow now, flanked by dense woods and occasional flashes of light from distant farms. She had no idea where they were, but she knew that they had to be far from her stepfather, far from the people who had been chasing her. And that thought alone made her feel safer, even if just a little. The convoy of bikers led by the one who had been with Maya pulled off the main road, turning onto a dirt path that led deeper into the woods. Maya's heart skipped a beat. The sound of the engines faded as they slowed down, and the wind settled into a more peaceful hum. As they reached a small clearing, Maya saw it, a house. It wasn't much, but it looked safe. It looked like it could offer some semblance of peace. The biker ahead of her pulled his bike to a stop in front of the house, and the others followed suit, parking their motorcycles in a neat row. Maya couldn't help but stare at the house, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The house wasn't large, but it was surrounded by tall trees, making it feel hidden, private, away from the chaos of the world. It was exactly what she needed. The biker who had been guiding her stepped off his bike, turning to face her. "This is it," he said softly. "You're safe here." Maya didn't know what to say. Her throat was tight, emotions swirling in her chest. She felt like she was on the edge of something new, something better, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. The thought of her mother still lingered in the back of her mind, but she couldn't let it consume her now. She needed to rest. She needed to be okay. As the group dismounted and began to make their way toward the house, the biker who had been her protector walked up to her. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Come on," he said, his voice gentle. "Let's get you inside." Maya followed him, her legs still unsteady from the ride, but feeling a small spark of hope flicker inside her. The house was simple, with a small porch and a sturdy wooden door. As they entered, the warmth of the place wrapped around her like a blanket. The interior was modest but cozy, with a few pieces of furniture and a small kitchen area. It smelled like wood and fresh air, a far cry from the cold, metallic air of the ferry. The bikers settled in, some sitting on the couches, others unpacking supplies. Maya stood near the door, unsure of what to do next. The biker who had been with her walked over, his expression softening as he saw her standing there. "You can rest here," he said, motioning toward one of the small bedrooms down the hallway. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." Maya nodded, though her mind was still racing. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that everything was finally going to be okay. But after everything she had been through, she knew it wouldn't be that simple. There was still so much she didn't understand, so much she still needed to figure out. But for now, this was enough. For now, she was safe. As she made her way to the bedroom, the door creaking open with a quiet sigh, she felt her body relax for the first time in what felt like forever. The bed was simple, but it felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could just be. She sat down on the edge, her exhaustion catching up with her as the adrenaline from the escape began to wear off. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, or the day after that. But for tonight, she was safe. And that, in itself, was enough. The silence in the room was thick with the weight of everything that had happened. Maya lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of the house around her. It was warm, quiet, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't looking over her shoulder, waiting for someone to find her. The feeling of safety, however fleeting, wrapped around her like a blanket. But despite the comfort of the room, Maya couldn't shake the thoughts racing through her mind. What if it wasn't over? What if her stepfather was still out there, still coming for her? The idea of staying here, in this house, felt like a luxury, but it also felt temporary. The fear that had gripped her heart for so long still lingered in her chest, a dull throb she couldn't ignore. She rolled over, the weight of the blanket pressing down on her, and stared out the small window beside the bed. The moon was high in the sky, casting a pale light over the woods surrounding the house. She could see the shadows of trees swaying in the breeze, their dark silhouettes blending into the night. It was peaceful here, a stark contrast to the chaos that had been her life for the past few days. But even in this moment of stillness, Maya knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. The bikers had been kind, but they had their own lives, their own worlds to return to. She didn't belong here, and the thought of being a burden on them made her stomach turn. Still, she didn't know what else to do. She had no other family, no one to turn to accept them. She had to stay, at least for now. The door creaked open, pulling Maya out of her thoughts. She turned her head to see the biker who had been by her side since the beginning step into the room. He stood in the doorway for a moment, his silhouette framed by the light from the hallway. His face was serious, but his eyes were soft when they met hers. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice gentle, almost like he was afraid to disturb the fragile peace in the room. Maya sat up slowly, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I'm okay, but I keep thinking it's not over. What if they come back?" He nodded, his expression softening. "I understand. But for now, you're safe. You've got people here who will protect you, no matter what." His words were comforting, but they didn't quite ease the tightness in her chest. Maya bit her lip, the question that had been burning in her mind finally escaping her. "What happens now? What do I do? I don't know how to be safe." The biker walked into the room, sitting on the edge of the bed beside her. "You're going to take it one step at a time," he said. "We'll figure it out. But right now, you need rest. You've been through a lot, and you need to take care of yourself." Maya didn't know if she could sleep. Her mind was too full, too overwhelmed. But the kindness in his voice, the calm certainty in his demeanor, made her feel like maybe she could take a breath, just for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave her a small smile, nodding. "You don't have to thank me. You're not alone anymore." Maya nodded, though the uncertainty still clung to her. The man stood up, giving her one last look before heading toward the door. "I'll check on you in the morning," he said, his voice soft. "Try to get some sleep." As he closed the door behind him, Maya leaned back against the pillow, staring up at the ceiling. She felt exhausted, every part of her aching from the constant fear, the constant running. But in that moment, as she lay there in the quiet, she allowed herself to hope, just a little. For the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. She wasn't sure what the future held, or how long it would be before her past came crashing back into her life. But for now, she had a chance. And that was enough to let her close her eyes and drift into a restless sleep. Outside the house, the night stretched on, the trees swaying in the wind, their shadows dancing across the ground. The world was still, but Maya knew that somewhere, in the quiet corners of the world, there was a chance for her to find peace. She wasn't there yet, but she was closer than she had ever been before. The journey ahead was uncertain, but with the bikers by her side, Maya felt like she could face whatever came next. The morning light filtered through the small window, casting a soft glow on the room. Maya woke up slowly, the remnants of her dream lingering in her mind. She wasn't sure if it had been real or just another nightmare, but it felt different. There was a quiet peace that hadn't been there before. She stretched, feeling the stiffness in her muscles from the tension of the past days, but there was no immediate rush to run. She could hear the sound of motorcycles in the distance, a steady hum that was almost comforting now. The bikers had set up a kind of camp around the house. Maya didn't know much about them, but she could tell they were ready. They were prepared for whatever came next. She had learned to trust them, at least for now. She sat up on the edge of the bed, the quiet of the house wrapping around her like a cloak. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted from downstairs, reminding her of something normal, something stable. It made her wonder what it would be like to have a life like that, quiet, without the constant fear of being hunted. She took a deep breath and pushed herself to her feet, still feeling unsteady. But the fear that had been with her for so long seemed to have faded just a little. Maybe it wasn't all gone, but it was quieter now, like a distant echo. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw the bikers gathered in the living room, talking quietly among themselves. They looked up when she entered, nodding their heads in acknowledgement. The woman who had spoken to her the night before, the one with the sharp eyes, was at the table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. "Morning," she said, her tone friendly but still serious. "How are you feeling?" Maya hesitated before answering. "Better. Still not sure what comes next," she said softly, her voice trailing off. The woman nodded, understanding. "That's normal. But we'll figure it out. You're safe here for now. No one's going to hurt you." Maya looked at the bikers, their faces calm, focused. They had all been through their own battles, she could tell. They were rough around the edges, but there was something comforting in their presence, something that made her feel like she didn't have to carry the world on her shoulders alone anymore. The biker who had protected her, the one who had been with her since the beginning, walked into the room. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "How are you doing?" he asked, his voice low but kind. Maya nodded, the tightness in her chest easing just a little. "I think I'm okay," she said, her voice still shaky. I don't know where to go from here." The biker looked at her, his eyes steady and understanding. "We'll figure it out," he said. "But for now, you're safe. And that's what matters." Maya nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. Safe. The word felt foreign to her, almost too good to be true. She hadn't felt safe in a long time, not since she had run from her stepfather. But now, surrounded by these bikers, there was a sense of protection that she hadn't had before. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't know how long it would last, but for now, it was enough. The woman with the sharp eyes stood up from the table and walked over to Maya. "We're not just here to protect you," she said, her voice serious but kind. "We're here to help you get your life back. We'll help you figure out what to do next." Maya looked at her, a flicker of hope igniting inside her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like there might be a chance to rebuild, to find some kind of peace. It was a long road ahead, but at least she wasn't walking it alone. "Thank you," Maya said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. The woman smiled at her, a hint of warmth in her eyes. "No need to thank us," she said. "You're one of us now. We look out for our own." Maya's heart swelled at the words, and she realized that for the first time in what felt like forever, she had a place where she belonged. She wasn't just a runaway, a victim. She was part of something bigger, part of a family. The realization was overwhelming, and for the first time, the fear that had been with her for so long began to loosen its grip. As the bikers gathered around the table, discussing their next move, Maya felt a strange sense of calm. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was no longer running. She was no longer fighting alone. She was part of something that had her back, and that made all the difference. The road ahead was still uncertain, but as she looked around at the bikers, their faces determined and focused, Maya knew that whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone. She had people who cared, people who would fight for her. And for the first time, that was enough. The following morning, the sun had barely begun to rise, casting a soft orange light over the woods surrounding the house. Maya awoke slowly, the sound of birds chirping outside the window pulling her from her restless sleep. The events of the last few days felt like a blur, like a dream she couldn't quite wake up from. But the quiet, the warmth of the house, and the stillness of the morning were real. She sat up in bed, the peacefulness of the moment making her feel more at ease than she had in a long time. She had been running for so long, fighting for her life, but now there was no immediate danger, no one chasing her. At least for now, she could breathe. She stood up, stretching out her sore muscles, and walked over to the window. The view outside was simple but beautiful. A small patch of grass, surrounded by towering trees, and a sky painted with the soft colors of dawn. The world seemed so still here, so far removed from everything she had known. It was a strange feeling, peace. She wasn't used to it. She wasn't sure if she would ever be. But for the first time in days, she felt safe. And that was a gift she wasn't ready to let go of. She turned away from the window and glanced around the room. It was simple, nothing extravagant, but it was hers for the moment. A small bed with soft sheets, a wooden dresser, and a single chair by the window. There was a sense of comfort here, and it was more than she had ever had. The door creaked open, and the biker who had been by her side since the beginning stepped inside. He had been quiet since the night before, giving her the space she needed to rest, but now he was here, his expression calm and steady. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice gentle. Maya paused for a moment, then nodded. "Better. I think I'm starting to believe this could be real," she said quietly. He smiled at that, a soft, reassuring smile. "It's real. You're safe here." Maya's heart tightened at his words, but she couldn't help the small flicker of hope that ignited within her. Safe. It felt strange to even say it. It felt almost impossible after everything she had been through. She looked up at him, her voice hesitant. "What happens now?" she asked. He stepped into the room, leaning against the doorframe as he crossed his arms. "Now we figure out what's next," he said simply. But right now, you need to rest. Let your mind settle. Maya shook her head, the uncertainty of what lay ahead creeping back into her thoughts. But I don't know where to go. I don't know what's next, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What if they come after me again? What if I'm just running in circles? The biker stepped closer to her, his eyes soft but firm. We'll take it one step at a time. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it day by day. We're going to protect you, and when you're ready, we'll help you figure out what's next. Maya didn't know if she was ready. She didn't know if she would ever be ready to let go of the fear that had been her constant companion. But hearing him say those words, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could start to hope. He paused for a moment, looking at her with a serious expression. You're not alone anymore, he said. You have a family now. We take care of each other. The words felt like a lifeline, like a promise she hadn't realized she needed. A promise that, for once, she didn't have to face the world on her own. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He gave her a small nod. You don't need to thank me, he said quietly. This is what we do. We take care of each other. That's what family is. Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders at his words. For the first time in days, she didn't feel like she was constantly running, constantly looking over her shoulder. She had a chance to breathe. She had a chance to be safe. The door opened again, and the woman from last night entered the room. She gave Maya a quick, warm smile, her eyes soft with understanding. You ready to eat? She asked, her voice friendly. Maya nodded. The thought of food, something warm and filling, made her stomach growl. Yes, she said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I think I'm ready. The woman nodded and turned toward the door. Come on, then. We've got a big day ahead. As Maya followed her out of the room, she glanced back at the biker who had been with her every step of the way. He gave her a nod of encouragement, and for the first time, Maya didn't feel so lost. She had a place here, at least for now. She didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, surrounded by people who cared, she could breathe. And that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing one, Maya began to settle into a new rhythm. She had come to realize that safety didn't come in a single moment, but rather in the gradual steps of trust, care, and understanding. The house, though simple, had become a sanctuary. The bikers, who were once strangers to her, had now become a family. They were there, not just for her protection, but for her well-being. Maya spent her mornings helping out around the house, learning small tasks that made her feel like a part of this new life. She helped prepare meals with the woman who had first welcomed her, and though the work was small, it gave her a sense of purpose. The man who had protected her, the one who had always been there, seemed to be everywhere, quietly watching over her, making sure she had everything she needed. There were no more late-night chases or the feeling of being hunted. Instead, she found herself laughing, talking, and even beginning to ask questions about the world beyond the safety of these walls. One evening, as the sun set in a burst of orange and pink across the sky, the biker who had been with her from the start sat beside her on the porch. The air was cool, the sounds of the night settling in, and for the first time in a long time, Maya felt at peace. She looked at him, unsure of how to put the swirling emotions into words. I don't know what I would have done without you, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the fading light of the evening. You would have figured it out. You're stronger than you think. Maya nodded, looking out at the horizon. She wanted to believe him. She had to. For so long, she had been running, looking over her shoulder, trying to survive. But now, for the first time, she didn't have to worry. She was allowed to be herself, to live without fear. And the bikers, the people who had taken her in, had given her that gift. What happens next? Maya asked, the question lingering in the air. The biker turned to her, his expression thoughtful. Next, he repeated, then smiled. You live. You take it one day at a time, and when you're ready, we'll help you figure out the rest. Maya's chest tightened at his words. The road ahead was still uncertain, but the difference now was that she wasn't walking it alone. She had a family here, and that was everything. The days went by, and Maya began to heal in ways she didn't even realize she needed. The constant worry faded as the bikers helped her rebuild her confidence. She trained with them, learning self-defense and how to live independently. Slowly, The woman who had first spoken to her became a mentor, teaching her everything from basic survival skills to how to trust again. But most of all, Maya learned how to be a part of something, how to be valued and cared for. One morning, after a long week of training, the biker who had been her protector approached her. "We're going to check out the town today," he said, his voice warm but serious. "You ready?" Maya looked at him, a feeling of anticipation rising within her. It wasn't just about seeing the outside world again. It was about knowing she could go back, stand on her own, and face whatever came next. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. They set out for the town, the familiar roar of motorcycles vibrating through the air. Maya felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as they made their way down the winding roads. It was the first time she had ventured out since arriving, and though the world outside seemed both vast and unknown, she felt prepared. The bikers kept a close watch, always protecting her, but Maya felt a sense of strength that she had never felt before. She was ready to face whatever the world had in store. When they arrived at the town, the bikers went their separate ways, keeping an eye on things while Maya and her protector stayed together. The sights and sounds of the town were overwhelming at first. The chatter of people walking down the street, the honking of car horns, the clink of coins in a vendor's booth. Everything felt so different from the quiet, hidden life she had been living. But there was also something exhilarating about it. For the first time, she felt like she was seeing the world with new eyes, like she could be a part of it. She wasn't just hiding. She was living. As the day went on, Maya took small steps into the town, finding comfort in the normalcy of it all. She smiled at a friendly vendor who offered her a fresh fruit, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like she was being watched. She wasn't a target. She was just a person. When they returned to the house that evening, Maya stood on the porch, watching the sky darken with the coming night. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. And as the bikers gathered around, talking and laughing, she realized that no matter where her journey took her, she would never have to face it alone again. She was home.